Welcome everybody to Friday as we talk some more about water on the front lines for peace. I think in some of the last presentations from Wednesday to the present, we've had the opportunity to think about water in various forms. We've thought about people and communities, ecosystems, all living creatures of the earth, and how a variety of water issues impact these, impact in various ways, the groups and Mother Earth that I just mentioned. But today, we're going to have the chance to, I guess you could say, get more specific, in particular with our presenters and the topics they're going to cover. First of all, we're going to hear from, we're going to hear about how sanctions, which we thought were, sanctions on banks, sanctions on the 1% in other countries, sanctions on particular corporations can be harmful and prevent them from being able to do the kind of business that they want to do to make more profit and to be able to exercise that power in various ways. But we're going to hear today from the panelists on the impact of US imposed sanctions on the human right to water. This will bring our attention down to the very important level of how sanctions can impact the access to safe water to drink for personal and family and community needs, and what we can do about that. It's a new way of looking at sanctions and really at the environmental and water impacts and how this puts water then on the front lines for peace, because as we know, without water, there's conflict and less peace. Then we will hear from Chris Jones. The title of his talk is "This is Their Land." What does he mean by that? Well, I urge you to tune in and listen to him at 6:45 Eastern Time, because he's really going to sort of pull the veil back from the harms that corporate agriculture and CAFOs, confined animal feeding organizations, do, and what we can do about that. How can we challenge that kind of power of the corporate power and ensure that our land is not their land to pollute? Many of the rivers and streams in Iowa, where he lives, are impacted and harmed. And what do we do about the issue of then the pollution of not only the streams and rivers, but also aquifers? And then we will hear from Mary Grant and Marcela Olivera. Mary Grant, who is the water organizer for Food and Water Watch, will talk about corporate violence through privatization of water. That is, when public water is out of our hands and is being managed by a large corporate multinational water corporation. And what do we do about that? Well, from her perspective, it's time to pass the Water Act, which they have introduced, Food and Water Watch has introduced to Congress. And that's something that the Earth Democracy Committee will be working on, to have WILPF members contact their Congress members to be sure that they support this act, that it gets fully funded, and that they will vote for it. And then we will hear from Marcela Olivera about blue communities, that is, making your community a blue community, protecting water resources, protecting public water. And she was recently at the World Water Forum in Bali, Indonesia, where the People's Water Forum was shut down rather violently by police and those opposing the People's Water Forum. And our UN Special Rapporteur on Water and Sanitation was there. and was prohibited from attending and getting into the building where the People's Water Forum should have been held. The title of this presentation is Building Translocal Solidarity for Global Water Justice. That's certainly what we need in this era now of water grabs, water pollution, harms to public health, and harms to ecosystems and all creatures on the earth. So please join in clicking in to these programs. And if you want to know more about the presenters, please go to the Congress website, click on Friday, and you'll get the schedule, and then click on program/Friday, and you will be able to read the wonderful biographies of these presenters. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nancy. I'm going to bring us into this space today with our land acknowledgement. I want to acknowledge that the land acknowledgement itself is just a small gesture. It becomes meaningful when we couple it with authentic relationships and informed action. But this beginning can be an opening to a great public consciousness of Native sovereignty and cultural rights, a step toward equitable relationship and reconciliation. We are here today virtually across many areas of Turtle Island and perhaps beyond. We acknowledge the land we are on as the territories of the indigenous people. But we know deep in our being that it is important not only to acknowledge the traditional caretakers of the land settled on, but also defer to and support our indigenous siblings in their movements for self-determination and land back. It is about honoring the past, gratefully recognizing present leaders in the community, and working together in the future with joy and resolve. Further, the Honor Native Land campaign is an assertion that we are all connected to the earth, the water, the air, the cosmos, and each other. Our destinies are intertwined in this moment of change, and we promote and create change that honors all living beings. We as WILPF remember that indigenous wisdom was taught for thousands of years, that relationships with one another in community, relationships with all nature are really what brings well-being in life. We honor those teachings as we celebrate and work for peace and justice. Thank you.
So I would like to introduce Darien De Lu, our president of WILPF US, for her remarks. Darien, are you unmuted?
Yes.
Good, thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, and I will try to leap into this. It's a pleasure to be here, and I really enjoy the land acknowledgement. I want to acknowledge that I'm here in Sacramento, California, which is Nisenan land, and the Nisenan people, also called the Valley Maidu, had taken beautiful care of the land, and so I have benefited from that. Unfortunately, since that time, we've been here and have not taken such care of the land. But I want to acknowledge the Nisenan. I want to acknowledge the connection to the land that people before us have demonstrated in the places we now inhabit. So on Wednesday, I talked about the story of this 35th Triennial Congress. And today I'm going to speak about this, the story of this WILPF US. WILPF US at a time of transition and in a world beset by fear. I don't like to talk about fear, but my story starts with fear and in WILPF hope. back in 1914, in that time of fear and hope, the four mothers of WILPF planned the first WILPF Congress in The Hague for 1915. They were partly driven by fear of a European war that would destroy civilization and cause untold deaths, pain, and destruction. They had hope. They were inspired by hope when they gathered, hope that they could perhaps bring a peaceful conclusion to the war. Like many hopes, that one was pretty much unrealized, and fears only magnified in the years to come. Yet hope has continued with WILPF. Unfortunately, these days, fear is the primary experience of many of us and many people in the world these days. We all know about fear. It's fostered in our media with frightening headlines. We look outside our windows and see that the climate is changing in ways that we can't, we can predict, but we're in denial about, and we can't predict the local effects. So what about fear? What are the effects of fear? When people are fearful, I think they yearn for safety and security, and that often leads to rejection of thinking in terms of shades of gray. People prefer black and white answers. And we've seen that in the United States with this, not just in the United States, but around the world, a preference for strong men. So here we are, we see how thinking is narrowed by fear. And I think fear also closes the mind to new ideas. We see this with immigration, the way that people's minds seem to be closed to new people in their community, instead of seeing the hope for new ideas, interesting foods, young labor force, all the things that we can get from an immigrant community. And I don't mean to cheapen culture to just food. There are many strong qualities in different cultures. Also, in response to fear, people tighten up. They become constrained in their actions, and they close ranks. And again, I think we see this in the reaction of people to the political refugees, to other changes going on in our society. At the same time, fear is an appropriate response to some situations, and it can be constructive. Fear of nuclear weapons led to the ICAN initiative for the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons to protect all of us from the global devastation of nuclear weapons. I'll come back to ICAN later. Fear also causes people to call for nuclear weapons, to say, we want the security that nuclear weapons give. This is an illusion, but people believe it. Additionally, at this time, people around the world have a renewed and deepened fear of conventional, so-called, weapons of mass destruction. We've seen to our horror how Israel has used them to level the cities of Gaza, to wreak untold damage, destruction, pain, and killing. As Arms Controller Beatrice Fien said, in talking about what led to the international prohibition of nuclear weapons, we have all agreed as an international community that civilians should not be targets. Leveling entire cities should not be acceptable under the rules of warfare. Well, thank you, Beatrice, for letting us know that at least some of the international community agreed to that at some time. But now, horrifyingly, we see how many states, such as the US and Israel, are prepared to slaughter massive amounts of civilians, to level vast areas. And with that realization, I wonder if this shift in the morality of states also means the fading of nuclear deterrence. are states going to hesitate any longer? We live in dangerous times. We have a right to be afraid. Also, because of WILPF's commitment to peace and our opposition to nuclear weapons, as WILPF anti-nuke activist Ray Atchison notes, some have called WILPF terminally unserious. That description is meant to belittle those of us concerned about nuclear weapons. In a world that is completely unserious about the terrible risk that nuclear weapons pose. As I just said, the recent and reckless disregard for international law and human rights leads me to question what Beatrice said about we have agreed to. So that brings me back to fear. As I said, there are so many ways that nuclear weapons don't keep us safe, and they don't keep the planet secure. I think all of you know that, and as Ray Atchison notes, you can ask those who've been most affected by nukes, such as the Japanese in World War II, and now with the threats from Korea, and the indigenous people in the US who suffered early deaths from the effects of uranium mining, and those in the Pacific whose island homes became testing grounds and who also continue to experience radiation damage. They got no security from nuclear weapons. And as I also said, we see now that weapons of mass destruction. What are they? 2,000-pound bombs, such as those the US is supplying to Israel, though at least at the moment, the 2,000-pound bombs aren't. But not only are these WMDs a threat to civilians generally, but they're also certainly not keeping the Jewish people around the world safe by Israel exercising its use of them. So all of this is part of the story of WILPF International, about the background of a constructive intersection of fear and WILPF when it comes to the internationally successful campaigns to abolish nukes and landmines and cluster bombs and more. And of course, international law has abolished nukes with the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Nukes and weapons of mass destruction are forms of dominance and control. And in WILPF, we believe we can achieve peace and nonviolence. We have succeeded with our allies in making many weapons that I just listed against international law. Yet in WILPF US, we're facing other kinds of fear. First, of course, as individuals, we have personal fears, some of which are private and others are public. Nearly all of us have private fears, such as extreme weather events, which are also public fears. And we have political fears, from the orange one and the white Christian supremacists who support him, to the horrors of our own government pouring our national resources into wars. And there's the economy. Did you know, just a second, sorry, well, sorry for that interruption. Did you know that the word economy originally comes from words that mean management and organization of the household? So we're all economists, but right now I'm talking about the economy of the US or of your area. Yes, we all have heard that the economy is doing great, employment is up, but so is the cost of living. More and more of us are facing serious economic constraints, and it's not just a stress, it's a fear for the future, for ourselves, and for our children and other loved ones. So in WILPF, we come to peace from a women's perspective, and that means, in part, that the personal is political. So as we struggle with our personal fears, let us remember what visionary Caroline Casey says. A visionary activist, Caroline Casey says, choose to have a cool head and a warm heart. And I'm sorry, I'm having technical difficulties here. There we go. That means we're aware of our fears and we face them with as cool and clear a mind as possible. Our goal is to avoid reactivity in the face of fear. And at the same time, let's cherish the openness and expansiveness and the warmth of our hearts. So maybe it's even easier for us to be cool with warm hearts around our fears for WILPFUS. Those are a little more distant from ourselves. And yes, this is part of the WILPFUS story, fear. Our organizational fears also call on us to have cool heads and warm hearts. But what are these organizational fears, you may ask? Well, our numbers are dwindling, our branches are becoming smaller and less active. And also we know that new generations are here and we hardly know them. Who are they? How do we talk to them? They're not like us. And my apologies and appreciations to those younger folks who are here. Perhaps you have the same questions about older folks. We in WILPF are in a special situation. We're in a time of great transition, so that's fear-provoking. Our membership is largely from generations from the political foment of the 1960s and 70s. And then there's a big void with few members from the generations who came of age in the eras of Reagan, Nixon, and Bush 1. So now we see another generation or two coming. Once again, a generation excited about progressive political change. We also are in a world changing in multiple ways with increased awareness of racism. So how do we as an organization change and grow and adapt our plans to be responsive to all of these circumstances? I want to emphasize that we have what's called the Lloyd Family Legacy Campaign going on, and that's something we'll talk about more in the member plenary session we're going to have. I see that part of our need to adapt and change requires us to be more skillful, to have more knowledge and understanding. So I just came, before being here now, from the diversity, equity, and inclusion training. I think responsiveness to racism and to ageism, which is a big factor with us, that these are important skills and understandings for us to have. And we also have to be better organizers. I'm hoping that more of us will commit to going through the series of lessons at the movement school that Popular Resistance has. And I want to talk to people about that more some other time. And I want us to find ways that we can more effectively sit in council in order to consider, discuss, figure out what we choose to do, because we are going to be in a situation where we are choosing to reimagine, redefine, re-envision what WILPF is. WILPF has to change with the times. So who will be in these councils that we have? Who will have votes? Who will have voices? These are things that we have to determine. Certainly, I think an important start for us would be a women's peace process in Palestine. How does that work? How can we do that? Can that be an international effort? That's one thing that we can gather in council to work out. So I've touched upon a number of areas. I'll close with a final one. I talked about changing generations. I think we're ready for not young WILPF. Pauline talked about that on Wednesday. We don't have young WILPF in the US, unfortunately, but what we could have is younger WILPF, a WILPF that's parallel to our current branches, but also separate in terms of being its own branches for those age 50 and under, that's younger WILPF for WILPF. And those groups, I think, will be more open to welcoming and being able to communicate across the challenging intergenerational communications gaps that we're facing in the world today. So we have a lot before us, a lot to undertake, and possibly some things we can talk about in the future. We can rise above fear. Thank you. I'll just say no single conference is going to be sufficient for us learning to change all of our ways and behaviors, but this is where we start. Thank you.
Thank you, Darien. I know you spent a lot of time on your remarks and have presented quite a bit to think about, to contemplate, and have discussions with each other. Some of the suggestions you made are very intriguing and I think provocative. Thank you very much. So now I would like to go on to the panels that we have today. The first, titled "The Impact of U.S. Imposed Sanctions on the Human Right to Water," is presenting for us Robin Lloyd, Jill Clark-Gollub, and Cynthia Roberts. These three women each have been accomplished local organizers, WILPF members, and longtime activists concerned about many different issues, local, national, and global. I would like each of them to introduce themselves before they begin the panel. And so I'll start with Robin. Thank you, Robin. Just brief introductions. Thank you.
I saw myself as the moderator who was going to introduce the other two speakers, but I guess you're the moderator. I am from Burlington, Vermont, and this issue of sanctions, I feel, is a very deep one for all of those on the Disarm Committee and concerned about war, because basically sanctions are an excuse. Sanctions are war by other means, and they are used very prolifically by our imperialist government. So we are going to discuss those issues, and I hope everyone will join us and listen. We have 38 people. That's good.
Thank you. Hello, Jill. You need to unmute. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. It's a pleasure to be here today. Hello to all my WILPF sisters in the different parts of the U.S. and maybe outside of the U.S. It's an honor to be here today.
You just tell us something about your background?
Yes. So I'm a new WILPF member. I joined at the beginning of last year, and I live part of the time in the Washington, D.C. area and part of the time in Burlington, Vermont. And I'm very happy to be in branches in both of those locations. And I'm from a family of Nicaraguans, Nicaragua U.S. family, and I do a lot of Nicaragua solidarity work. And unfortunately, that entails fighting sanctions. And
Thank you. Oh, excuse me.
That's all. Thank you.
Yeah. And hello, Cynthia.
Hi, all. Thanks. Pleasure to be here. And I'm in Indiana. I'm actually sending by some water flowing through one of my nice calming spots to go. I've been a WILPF member since the mid-90s and have been especially focused on Cuba, so have quite some time been part of the Cuba and Bolivarian Alliance issues, and then also part of a sister city we have here in Bloomington, Indiana, with Santa Clara too.
Thank you very much. So now please start.
Okay, I will introduce the pattern for today. We only have half an hour. Jill has done a slideshow, and we'll start out about her work and in the Americas Without Sanctions campaign. And then Cynthia will speak about her experience in Cuba and with the Bolivarian Alliance. And then I will end up with, if there's any time, with a map about to picture the impact of all of these sanctions around the world. And then we'll have questions if there's time for us in the half hour. And I can't go much more than the half hour because I have another engagement out there, but let's jump in, and Jill, you get started.
Okay, thank you, Robin. And I just like to say that this also has a lot of data from Sanctions Kill, the worldwide anti-sanctions coalition that WILPF US is a part of, and also with some data from Americas Without Sanctions that WILPF is also a part of as well. And so I would like to share my screen. Here we go. And I hope you are seeing this now in the full screen mode. Could somebody tell me if you are?
Yes, yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so we're good. Sanctions are, the proper name for sanctions is unilateral coercive measures. And I'm going to talk about the importance of safe drinking water, what unilateral coercive measures or sanctions are, how they impact the human right to clean water, and how they're a part of hybrid warfare, and then what we can do about it. Water is life. Like the right to life, the right to water and sanitation is recognized as fundamental to attaining all other human rights. This is why the member states of the United Nations have made the universal availability of access to clean water, clean drinking water, sanitation, and hand hygiene as one of the Sustainable Development Goals to be achieved by 2030. Globally, however, 2.1 billion people do not have access to safe drinking water at home, which disproportionately affects women and girls due to their needs of increased vulnerability due to an infection around menstruation and reproduction. Women and girls also have a larger role relative to men in water, sanitation, and hygiene activities, including in agriculture and domestic labor. This situation has implications for gender equality and empowerment. The Sustainable Development Goals make an important initial step in connecting water, sanitation, hygiene, and gender equality and empowerment, which emphasizes access to equitable sanitation and hygiene and the needs of women and girls. But what our US government is doing is going to make it harder for the world to reach the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, what are sanctions or unilateral coercive measures? They're economic or other restrictions imposed on a country, corporation, or person. They restrict trade, block financial transactions, freeze assets, reduce foreign aid, and lead to travel bans. We can see here on this map the countries that are sanctioned. The US has imposed sanctions on over 39 countries where 1/3 of humanity lives. And in fact, since this map was made, sanctions have been introduced against Honduras. These sanctions cause chronic shortages of basic goods and services, which especially impacts the elderly, the poor, children, and the sick. We should also be aware that only sanctions imposed by the United Nations are legal. This means that all sanctions imposed by the United States Congress or the White House are illegal. And sanctions prevent access to clean water by blocking imports of equipment and parts to process and transport water, and they raise energy prices or impair energy infrastructure needed to pump water. And now I'm going to go through a few countries that we have data on specifically with regard to sanctions and water from the UN Special Rapporteur on the impact of coercive measures. 2022 data tells us that in Syria, lack of electricity to run water supply systems is causing widespread shortages of drinking water. This led to a cholera outbreak with over 20,000 suspected cases. Drinking water in most households is only available 1 to 2 hours every few days. There are no spare parts to repair water pumps, and only 20% of agricultural land can be irrigated. This means there is less food. From the report on Zimbabwe in 2022, we see that unilateral sanctions reduce the availability of clean water and sanitation. Most areas only have clean drinking water 8 hours a day, whereas they had it 24 hours before sanctions. This has led to epidemics such as cholera and typhoid, killing at least 3,000 people and placing 100,000 people at risk. Though the country spends more and more on water and sanitation, household coverage has dropped under sanctions from 29% now, whereas it was 33% before the sanctions were imposed. Venezuela, the Special Rapporteur reported in 2021 that water is delivered 1 to 2 times a week in collective tanks, but it has to be boiled before it can be drunk. Only half of the distribution units are running because it is impossible to buy spare parts or chemical agents for purification. Households use improperly treated and unsafe surface water and wells. 79% of health facilities and 61% of schools lack daily access to potable water. This situation is part of why 40,000 deaths have been attributed to US imposed sanctions in just 1 year in Venezuela. Now, Palestine is a little bit different because our government is not directly imposing the sanctions. Rather, the government that it funds and that it protects at the UN, Israel, is imposing these sanctions. And I have a little bit of data here about before the current Gaza war started. So this is what Palestinians and particularly Gazans lived with for years before the current war. 98% of the water is not fit for human consumption. Less than 10% of the population has direct access to clean and safe drinking water. 1/4 of illnesses are waterborne, such as cholera, giardia, polio, and viral meningitis from biological and chemical contamination. And about 12% of child deaths are linked to intestinal infections related to contaminated water. And we know this has grown much, much worse with the current war. Nicaragua is an example of a low-income country in which sanctions are denying people the right to development. So the current government has prioritized increasing household access to potable water, and it has gone up from 65% of households to 94.5% over the past 17 years. But it will get harder to close the gap with sanctions in place. From 2018 to 2022, Nicaragua lost over $1.7 billion in multilateral funding, including to expand access to safe drinking water in rural areas. Loans from the Inter-American Development Bank dropped by $131 million per year, which would have been used to build 265 kilometers of roads, 4 hospitals, and improve drinking water systems in 2 department capitals. And there has been no access to loans to alleviate the drought caused by climate change in Nicaragua's dry corridor. Oops. So it's important to be aware that unilateral coercive measures are part of hybrid warfare, which includes disinformation campaigns, coercive measures or economic warfare, international isolation, and the threat of violence. The purpose of this hybrid warfare is to bring about regime change, and also to make alternatives to the US system look like failures. How many times have we heard that, oh, socialism is a failure, look at Cuba or look at Venezuela? This is to discourage people from doing something different from the US system. So where is the coercion in these unilateral coercive measures? One way that we find it is when these coercive measures are used to get people to vote for candidates that the United States favors. In 1990, the US government promised the Nicaraguan people that there would be more sanctions and the Contra War would continue if they didn't elect a candidate that the US favored. And in fact, the Nicaraguan people cried uncle and voted the way the US wanted. In 2021, the same thing happened. There was an election with sanctions looming over the population imposed, and in fact, they went through right before the vote. But this time, the Nicaraguan people had decided that a US candidate with neoliberal policies would leave them in worse misery, and that time the tactic did not work. Right now, 2024 in Venezuela, the US is trying to do the same thing. Since the Venezuelan electoral authorities did not authorize a candidate who called for violent US intervention and had been declared unfit for office, the US is reimposing some sanctions that had been lifted through negotiations, essentially trying to get more access to Venezuelan oil. So let's think about what we can do about it. Some of what we can do about it has been mentioned at the beginning of the talk. We can do education through the Sanctions Kill campaign. And this, you have the website there, and I'm very happy to share my slides so that people can see this information and the references that I have in the slide at the end. But the Sanctions Kill campaign has a toolkit which you can use to educate yourself and others. And in fact, a couple of my slides come from that toolkit. We also have advocacy through the Americas Without Sanctions campaign, and this is targeting the countries of the Americas, and it's aimed at lobbying Congress in person and virtually and through petitions. And one thing we can do, for example, is support a resolution in the House of Representatives that calls for a new, more positive foreign policy towards Latin America, including the lifting of all unilateral economic measures. And we can also protest. At the protests coming up, for example, against NATO, we have an opportunity to point out that sanctions are a form of warfare. I encourage WILPF to join the Zone of Peace campaign, which wants to end US military involvement in Latin America. And one of its core demands is to end all illegal sanctions and blockades of regional states, including economic warfare and lawfare, and recognize their sovereignty. So I hope that we can help raise this banner and hold some signs that say this. And then finally, for those who are interested in receiving my this PowerPoint, there are the references from where I got some of this data. So I thank you very much, and I'll hand it over to Robin again.
She's going to talk primarily about sanctions' impact on Cuba.
Sanctions affect virtually all aspects of life in Cuba. The burden falls disproportionately on women and children. Daily life can become a task in and of itself. The State Sponsor of Terrorism, or SSOT designation, which was reintroduced by Trump in his office, was deepened or has deepened the suffering to which Cubans had become accustomed under this 6-decade-long blockade. The 243 new restrictions imposed by Trump have only exacerbated conditions of which Cubans were hopeful would be obliterated following the trend by Obama. After Obama, Cuba's dedication to preventative measures is widely recognized in healthcare, also in climate change. They rehearse evacuations for storms and emergency responses to hurricanes, which are a common phenomenon in the Caribbean. Vida, or Life Tasks, is a name of a government initiative begun in 2017. It is in line with Sustainable Goal Development number 6, the right to water and sanitation. There's a video by that same name available for online viewing, and I'll drop that in the chat once I finish my segment here. Preparedness has always been a key component of Cuban policy, where they make use of science and innovation to address healthcare, climate change, and many other circumstances faced by Cubans daily, but often thwarted by, or almost always thwarted by US policy. Okay, if we want to go to photo 2, we'll take a look at daily life in Cuba. Conditions vary to some degree, whether the location is rural or urban. Water may be captured in buckets or rain barrels, often on rooftops from which it may be pumped. Water may also arrive sporadically through aqueducts. Next slide. Pictures is Alvera's aqueduct, which was one of the first in Old Havana, and through maintenance continues to flow today. Those without tanks and pumps may collect water at a communal source in buckets. Water may or may not be available in one's home or yard through a spigot. It's often cold, so those with the necessary source will heat it for bathing or boil it for drinking. In rural areas, more often, showering is done by pouring the water over oneself. Washing clothes is often carried out with the use of a washboard and sink and a makeshift spin tank, which is filled and drained by manually controlled hoses. Most people drink water straight from the tap, some of whom may have installed their own filters. There are water treatment plants in cities, but aging infrastructure affects the purity. The water is chlorinated and of good quality when it enters the system, but after traveling through old leaky pipes, it is subject to contamination. A large volume of water is also lost as a result of these leaks, and standing water can easily breed insects. Cuba does bottle water, which you see pictured there. By and large, this is merely for tourist population and non-Cubans. Most households have water tanks to help manage the problem of outages. Case in point, a compañera in Santa Clara, Cuba, related a recent experience of lacking water for 2 weeks. On day 18, the aqueduct was open and she was able to fill her tank. But water is necessary for multiple uses beyond having it to drink. Laundry must be done, bathing is essential, and the mere act of flushing the toilet, which is done in many households by pouring in a bucket of water, which further complicates daily life. Scarcity of water has everything to do with fuel shortages, a direct result of unilateral US sanctions on Cuba. From a mere 6 reservoirs in 1959, Cuba now has over 200, so the fault is not one of neglect by the Cuban government. And to credit the next photo, number 5, it's a reservoir. Quote, Cuba has more than 240 dams with a reservoir capacity of over 9 billion cubic meters of water as part of the infrastructure designed to guarantee a water supply to the population, promote industrial development plans, agricultural irrigation, and flood control, end quote. Obviously, the fuel shortage has a detrimental effect. Low water pressure frequently does not keep the pumps in motion. Products such as anthracite used in water filtration systems, which are generally equipped with pressure gauges, are not available in Villa Clara, as we learned in a visit to Santa Clara by our mayor and the city's utility manager. Such is the result of the severe trade restrictions which are applied to Cuba. Next photo. In urban areas, water may be brought in by truck. We'll get to this one. Yeah, the truck is the last one, really, Jill. There you go. In urban areas, water may be brought in a truck to replenish the storage tank. In both instances, impact of fuel shortages is severe. Critical to water availability and purity are a number of factors. And there may be a slide of the piping laid, but they and the aqueducts have long been a goal. Revitalizing aging pipes and aqueducts has long been a goal to supply, there we go, more and cleaner with their finance venture are not available. Combination of climate change, along with the impact of the SSOT, has perpetuated increased deficits of fuel supplies and electrical blackouts. The ability of Cuba to enact the policies that would benefit their citizenry is the change in visa waivers for entry into the US by Europeans who once had automatic entry status. Now, if they visit Cuba prior to a visit to the US, they must reapply for a visa, which entails a very lengthy wait, circumventing a direct visit from Cuba to the US. This is a significant economic fall in terms of tourist income. Another quote from the Cuban President Diaz-Canel: "When there are blackouts, the water supply is affected because the water supply sources also work with electricity. We have made a very important investment now in transforming pumping systems into photovoltaic systems, and this is part of the things we are doing to overcome the situation. Alternating periods of power are commonplace and can last for well over 4 hours. I got an update recently from a friend in Havana who is periodically without water, saying, quote, it's nothing that the Cubans can't resist. We are continuing fighting and we will win," end quote. Summer temps in most of Cuba are extreme and be worsening. Studies predict less rainfall, higher temperatures, and more intense droughts, with a possible 35% reduction in rainfall by the year 2100. Another consequence of climate change is sea levels are projected to rise, a phenomena that will aggravate saltwater intrusion, hence the need for desalination. And they've been able to bring to fruition an OPEC-sponsored initiative in 6 places of the 9 that they had originally intended. Rising water levels affect living spaces, which flood and impact the livelihood of fishermen. And these two, with all this water, are in regard to that. The frequency and severity of extreme weather events, hurricanes, drought, torrential rain, is increasing to the detriment of ecosystems, food production, and public health. It's said that without action to protect the coastline from rising sea levels, up to 10% of Cuban territory could be submerged by the end of the century. This would lead to pollution of the water supply, damage to beaches, and or destruction of homes and fishing villages. I see we're getting close to the half hour, so cut in whenever you need to. A survey showed that only 10% of satisfaction with current conditions of water, but this is what Cubans do and see how they can best remedy it. So in addition to hydraulic electricity, they will continue to expand the use of solar energy and seek solutions to do what they can to rectify circumstances within the imposed limitations. Cut off there if, I'll just briefly state, drinking water is promised in the Cuban's new constitution. I wanted to have a couple positive things. There's mangroves are very good in restoration. They're being restored, which helps with water issues, and it's part of the Caribbean biological corridor. And I have one more quote, I guess, from the president. "We are betting on renewable energy sources, both wind and photovoltaic, biogas, a whole group of concepts, but above all, photovoltaic, because it is an investment that can be installed in less time." I'll just stop there. I had a little more, but Robin might want to say a few words.
Okay.
Right, so you all still have
Cynthia.
till 6:45
Yes,
p.m. Eastern time. You're slated for another 12 minutes. Thank you.
I'll continue then. I did a few more paragraphs. Okay, I said that one. Evidence of the trade restrictions that are especially severe in the case of Cuba, and U.S. policy restricts other countries' trade with Cuba if 10% or more of a product is of U.S. origin, as a provision of the Export Administration regulations. And this is all covered federal industry. It's kind of legal jargon. One thing Cuba has had to struggle against since the revolutionary forces came to power is the Mallory Memo from the 60s, which, despite some adjustments under consecutive presidencies, its application has been in effect to some degree, with the goal of eradicating Cuba's chosen form of government and denying their sovereignty. It specifies that to overthrow the revolution, the U.S. must, quote, cause economic asphyxiation, do everything possible to make the people suffer hardship, and cause shortages that would lead to a break with the revolution and its ultimate demise. So, in summary, the drinking water is not taken for granted in Cuba. There's sparse rainfall coupled with the exhaustion of water utilities from brought on by the economic hardships. And they have extreme heat, which I just read is one of the major killers of people, more so hurricanes, floods, or tornadoes. And I'm going to drop two things in the chat, the link to the film Tarea Vida, and then also Let Cuba Live info, where we can request that the state sponsor of terrorism designation can be lifted, because that Biden can do. It's a lot more complicated now to remove the blockade. Thank you so much. Robin, it's all yours.
Wow, thank you. Thank you. You covered so much there, and everyone should be take time to go to Cuba themselves. I've gone a few times. It's so inspiring to live in a culture that is not based on capitalism as ours is. So we have one final map, I think, that Jill will show. Just to emphasize one of the things that Cynthia says, these secondary sanctions, those are basically the United States over complies sometimes with the sanctions. In other words, U.S. says Cuba will not get any certain items, and the United States will not let other countries give those items to Cuba. So those are called secondary sanctions, and that really puts a very difficult way of getting around the sanctions, because that's really affected tourism in Cuba a lot, because even the European countries now are shy of going to Cuba. And just one other thing is that before we have time for maybe a few questions, that the United Nations has instigated 15 sanctions on 15 countries, but the United States, and these are unilateral sanctions that are actually illegal. We have, our country has, I have listed 60, I think. Jill gave another number earlier, but in other words, the powerful force the poor to comply, and if they don't, they're going to get more poor. So this map is one of many maps that were created by Ben Norton, Norton. Do any of you know him? He's quite a compelling speaker with beautiful blue eyes. And he has analyzed all the votes at the United Nations, both in the General Assembly. This is what we're looking at, in favor of condemning these sanctions, 128 countries, and against that, in other words, those who allied with the United States, and they are in red, were just 54. But you can see how clear this is, and he calls his sort of podcast the West against the rest. The West is against the rest of the world. That's the green part here. And West is a white people, Europe and Japan and Australia. So it's very clear dichotomy in what's happening, and has enforced through these sanctions. So are there any other questions or thoughts or response to all of this? Oh,
Darien De Lu has a question.
yeah, Darien, go ahead.
I was wondering if you could say, I think we've all been persuaded by this presentation that sanctions are simply another form of warfare. What would be more peaceful ways to influence the policies to which we're objecting? And I don't mean, gee, they have a different economic system, but things like human rights violations that concern us in other countries. So
Yeah.
what's an alternative?
Jill, go ahead.
Well, I will say that Alfred de Zayas, the UN expert, has published has published some reports talking about how sanctions actually diminish human rights. I know that's not exactly an answer to your question, but it's my personal view, and it's a view I share with a lot of people that are involved in these anti-sanctions coalitions that I projected on the screen, that it's our job as citizens of the United States and residents in the United States, of the country that is imposing the biggest violations of human rights through war and interference in other countries, to tell our country to stop and to let the people in the countries that the US thinks it needs to teach a lesson to let them manage their government. And it's not our job to police them, to tell them that they have to have a system, or that they have to respect human rights the way that our government tells us to, because this is part of hybrid warfare, and we should be aware that there's a lot of disinformation that is fed to us on a very much a daily basis. I think one example, and I heard you mention something about Israel when you spoke before, is the propaganda around Israel. And that's really been eye-opening, I think, to a lot of people in this latest period with the war in Gaza. There is propaganda like that against many of the countries that the United States has disagreements with.
Yeah, well, thank you. And Cheryl is next, and I'm going to sign off because I do have to be somewhere. So thank you, everyone. Keep going.
Thank you very much. And now we'll do questions and answers.
Yes, this is Cheryl Spencer. I'm a co-chair of the Disarm Committee, and tomorrow morning in Pacific time, 10:15, our committee will be having a session on conflicts over water that have been going on for 4,500 years. And we're going to be highlighting what can be done about that, because the UN actually has a program they call Peace and Prosperity. So the idea is to use water as a peace building tool rather than a peace conflict tool. And I would, so please come to our session tomorrow, where we will expand on trying to make, water have a collaborative and equitable tools to build peace rather than these conflicts. And I'm sorry that, the sanctions are working against that. So anyway, that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Do I have the floor? I just wanted to say that also tomorrow there will be, I think it's 3:45, the Cuban Bolivarian Alliance are going to talk about the Caribbean as a zone of peace, for one. And then to swing back to what Jill said about propaganda, sometimes I know that everybody here is very savvy about their media sources, but that often the clips that they show of a demonstration in Cuba, if you look at it closely, is not really even the truth of what they're sharing, just like Jill referred to with the propaganda we get about Israel. So it's just something to beware of.
I'm holding up a copy of Alfred de Zeps' book, which I was in a group of reading, and he is a UN rapporteur, special rapporteur, and has written about, sanctions and necessity for water. I think Jill Clark-Gollub just mentioned him. So I wanted you to know of his book, A Just World Order, Building a Just World Order.
And I just put in the chat an article by him that's shorter than the book. And actually, I just remembered he has a book since the one that Jean, thank you, that's a great resource that you shared. He also has one, I think it's called the Human Rights Industry, but he is a good person to follow. Yeah. And if there's no one dying to speak right now, I could also say that Alfred de Zeps and John Perry are going to speak at a webinar about the weaponization of human rights. It's being put on by the Nicaragua webinar series. And that's going to be on June 23rd at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And if anybody writes to me, I put my address in there before I can find the information. I don't think I can find it quickly enough to share right now, but.
Thanks, but we could also put it on our Facebook page and share it that way too. So yes, I'll send you my email so we can share that. Thank you.
You.
Looks like Nancy's got her hand out.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I'm glad you brought up the issue of violation of human rights because of course we have the human right to water, the human right to health, and then at the UN, and then of course the rights of the child, which the US has never ratified. So when you talk about these sanctions are illegal, I think we have to develop a much more vigorous campaign to show exactly what's going on here in regard to human rights. I mean, it's evident, but I think we need to campaign more.
Great, let's get WILPF more involved. I'd love to have you involved in our work, Nancy. That would be great.
Well,
The Disarm Issue Committee sees the problem with sanctions as part of our purview. And so you're all welcome to join our Disarm Committee. And because we have many campaigns working on different aspects of disarmament and ending wars. And we could do with some more people who are willing to work on the sanctions aspect and the awful outcomes of the sanctions that the US is imposing. So I will put in the chat the Disarm Chair email address that you can, tell us you want to join our committee. And Darien, I really enjoyed your talk. This issue of fear is very important. It's allowing our opponents to make progress, and so we have to somehow or other turn it around so that we're not using fear to drive us in the wrong direction. Thank you.
so let me just introduce Chris Jones here, and without further ado, so you have time to finish your presentation and also have some questions and answers, I'd just like to ask you, I guess you're going to reveal to us what "this is our land" really means.
Well, we have this, the Woody
Please,
Guthrie
excuse me.
song, of course, "This land is our land." And of course, in Iowa, it isn't. It belongs to agriculture. And so we're at the mercy of agriculture. And so that's what the title alludes to.
Will you just introduce yourself before you start your presentation?
So yes, my name's Chris Jones. I am in Iowa City, Iowa right now. I am retired from the University of Iowa. I previously worked at the Des Moines Waterworks and the Iowa Soybean Association, and most of my career was spent studying water quality and environmental outcomes of Corn Belt agriculture. And I still do that. I write a Substack, riverraccoon.substack.com, and I have a book called The Swine Republic. I was recently selected for the one of 56 books selected in the US for the National Book Festival sponsored by the Library of Congress. And so that's my story.
That's your story. Now the rest of the story.
Okay,
Thank
the rest
you
of
very
the
much.
story. And so I presume you want me to cut this a little shorter than what I intended.
No, you're actually right on time. You actually made it,
Okay.
like Tina said, right on time. Thank you.
Okay. And so I live in Iowa City most of the time, but I also I have a place up at DeSoto, Wisconsin, right across the Mississippi River from Iowa. And so that's where this photo is taken. And so I love that. That's a driftless area, unglaciated part of Wisconsin, and similar topography in Iowa and Minnesota and Northwest Illinois. And so that's this picture here. And so there I am. There's my Substack. There's my book. And so most of my work is Iowa centric, okay? And so I'm going to spend most of my time talking about Iowa, but again, this is all relevant to the Corn Belt in general, and in fact, other production systems in other countries, for example, the Netherlands, and then South America and other places. And so before European settlement, this is what Iowa looked like. We had about 20% of our land in these pothole wetlands, especially in the north central part of the state. We had about 70% of our land in tall grass prairie there in the lower right, and about 5% or so in the oak savanna, which is kind of a mixture of dispersed oak trees amongst prairie grasses. And of course, all this stuff is gone. We converted it all to agriculture. And so this is what our state looks like now. The brown is in row crops. The light green is pasture. The dark green is forest. And so about 70% of our land is cropped, which is a huge number. And about 97% of it is privately owned. And this is the second highest figure in the country. And so we have very little public land. And so when we try to do restoration work here in Iowa out of necessity, it's being done on private land, which in itself is inherently limited because we need the permission of the landowner to do anything. Our streams prior to a settlement were these wide, shallow systems. We know the prairie streams were clear water systems. They had sand and gravel as the substrate. They were wide and shallow, and they spilled out into the floodplain very frequently. The water table was close to the surface of the earth, and then we had clean water species like a smallmouth bass and pumpkin seed sunfish, and then the generalist species, a channel catfish. And then we got here about the same time that John Deere invented the steel plow, and we started breaking the prairie. And then the other thing we did is we drained the land. And so it's very important to understand this when we think about the environmental consequences of agriculture. And so we did that by putting in these clay pipe sections, and you can see in the upper left there, those guys in Boone County, which is west of Ames, put these pipe sections down with gaps in between the sections that allow water to seep in. Then they built these trapezoidal ditches with the steam shovels there in the lower left to receive the water. And so that lowered the water table 4 feet across pretty much everything in Iowa north of Interstate 80. And so this made things conducive for crop production. And so now, instead of our streams starting as a wetland, gently spilling over into a stream channel, now this is how our streams start. And so we have a bunch of field tiles here, all dumping in or discharging into a common point. And this is the start of the Iowa River, which flows through Iowa City here where I'm sitting. And so because we've changed the hydrology of this, that is very intimately connected to water quality. And so when we look across Iowa, this drop from this initial drop from the tiles down to the stream channel averages about 1 meter across Iowa. And so what we've done is we've energized that water, okay? We have put 3 foot ahead on all this water, and we've given it more energy. And this has caused degradation of not only the hydrology, but also water quality. The other big thing we've done is we've straightened our streams. And so this is Walnut Creek in Jasper County, just east of Des Moines. The red line there is the stream channel now. The green line is the stream channel in 1930. So we straightened these streams to square them up for farming. And that particular stream, Walnut Creek, we've cut the linear distance there in half. And so we see the red line is 500 meters, the green line is 1,000 meters, but the vertical drop between point A and point B is the same. And so what that means is that water has more energy and it goes faster. And so now all our streams in Iowa, or most of them, are on the right there in the stage 3 or stage 4 condition of degradation because they erode downward. And so here's Walnut Creek, and these two photos are taken from the same spot. You can see that hill slope in the background there. And this is no kidding, that stream can go from the upper photo to the lower photo and back to the upper photo in 24 hours. And so the streams are very flashy. They change stage very rapidly with precipitation. We see that black dirt there in the upper photo. About the first 6 feet of that has all been deposited since settlement. And so that's what we call unconsolidated. It's very vulnerable to erosion, and it's very vulnerable to sloughing. And so we see the stream bank sloughing off into the stream there. And so as a consequence, our streams are always muddy, even when it's not raining, because of this sloughing phenomenon. And so none of our native species evolved to live in this hydrologic condition, okay? And so as I said, the clean water species, smallmouth bass and pumpkin seed sunfish, you know, they don't thrive in this. And so now our streams are all down in these canyons. And if you were to drive across the countryside and look down at a stream from a bridge, you might think that that's the way it should look. It should not look that way. And so the streams have cut downward, right? And so we've silted in the sands and gravels and the river bottom. Instead of perennial plants on the stream banks, we have the annual plants only 4 months out of the year, the corn and soybean. And then we have pollution tolerant species like the carp and the bullhead, and we still have the generalist species, the channel catfish. And so we have straightened thousands of miles of streams in Iowa. And so on the right there, that's the South Skunk River, southeast of Ames. And so this is really a terrible thing. And so when we look at these streams and think, oh, well, that's the way it's supposed to look, that's what we call a landscape bias, where people don't really know what their streams and lakes should look like or could look like. And as a result, we think that what we see is okay when it's not. The other big thing we've done here when we were doing this straightening of streams and breaking the prairie is that we've transformed our farms. And so this is a very famous graphic from Iowa DNR in the pheasant study in 1970s. This is a farm in Winnebago County, Iowa, in northern Iowa, and we see a real diversity of land use there. And so we have hay and oats and corn, we have some pasture, we have some wood lots, and then we fast forward to 1976, and this has all been condensed down to mainly 2 species, corn and soybean. We have still a little bit of hay left and a little bit of oats left in 1976. And so even that would be gone in the present day. And so we know in nature, nature likes diversity on the landscape, right? Well, we've removed all the diversity from the landscape. And so now our farming systems look like this. And so we have the clean rows of GMO crops there at the top, the corn and soybeans. We have the hog industry. We have 25 million hogs here in Iowa. You can drive across the state and never see a hog. That's because they're in these buildings up on the horizon. And then we have the ethanol industry there at the bottom. And so this all looks very clean, right? To the average observer, this looks clean and nice. But we know it's had environmental consequences. And so on all that, we have 8,000 CAFOs dispersed across the state. They're not evenly scattered. We have a concentration in northwest Iowa, north central Iowa, and then also southeast Iowa, south of Iowa City. And so all of this has had consequences for our water. And the 2 main things we talk about are the soil erosion that causes the water to be muddy, and then the nutrient pollution from the nitrogen and phosphorus from the fertilizer and the manure that cause these terrible algae blooms and make our lakes and streams unusable. So what I talk about all the time is we have a problem of scale here. And so we often think, well, if we could just get the farmers to do this, that, and the other thing, things would get better. And I would say, no, we really need to look at the problem of scale. We have so much of this. So can we get the environmental outcomes that we want when we're farming at this scale? And so we have 70% of our land in crops. We have 11,000 square miles of land that's used for to grow corn for ethanol. That's just in Iowa. 25 million hogs. We have a large beef industry. We're the largest egg state. We have 80 million laying chickens, 5 million turkeys, 4 million broiler chickens, and then we have a sizable dairy industry with 250,000 dairy cows. And so can we get the environmental outcomes that we want when we're producing at this scale? We hear a lot from the industry how soil erosion has improved a lot over the last 50 years or so, but soil loss is still very high in Iowa. We saw improvements from about 1985 up until about the year 2000, when we had conservation compliance in the Farm Bill that required farmers to adopt a soil conservation plan if they were farming on highly erodible land. That worked, but we have not seen much improvement since 2000. And so these are the areas of the state where erosion is worst. And we can see there in western Iowa, and then in far northeast Iowa and east central Iowa. And so Iowa is still the worst state in the United States for soil erosion. We can see the other states there, Minnesota number 2. All this has had consequences for our drinking water. And so since the year 2000, we've had 7,000 private wells in Iowa test above the safe drinking water limit set by EPA of 10 parts per million. 1/3 of our public water supplies have been deemed vulnerable to contamination by Iowa DNR. We have 60 public water supplies that actually have to remove nitrate, and about 1/4 of all people in Iowa drink water that has been treated for nitrate reduction. We hear a lot about Des Moines. Des Moines has the largest nitrate removal facility in the world. And if you watch John Oliver on TV, he recently did a piece on corn and ethanol, and there's some footage from this treatment facility there in Des Moines in the John Oliver program. That has been there since 1992. And so, almost 2 generations have gone by, and we still have not solved this problem. The safe drinking water limit set by EPA is 10 parts per million, but we've known for a long time now, almost a quarter of a century, that drinking water with nitrate less than that presents a health risk to adults. And so this study published 23 years ago associating drinking water nitrate and cancer in older women in Iowa. This other study here, 1.6 times the elevated risk of bladder cancer in postmenopausal women in Iowa who consumed 5 parts per million nitrate water for more than 4 years. Bladder cancer there. This one, 14 years ago, published positive associations between drinking water nitrate, that's water with more than 5 parts per million for more than 5 years, and thyroid cancer. And so how many people in Iowa are drinking water with more than 5 parts per million nitrate? Well, almost 1 million people. Okay, almost 1/3 of the population is drinking water above that 5 part per million threshold. Here, this paper 14 years ago, 3 part per million nitrate water. Consuming that water doubled the risk of ovarian cancer in Iowa women. This paper published 11 years ago, mothers consuming water with more than 5 part per million nitrate, twice as likely to give birth to babies with these birth defects. 8 years ago, not just cancer, 8 years ago, we have a paper published, living within 1 mile of a CAFO doubles your risk of an antibiotic resistant staph infection. And so CAFO is a concentrated animal feeding operation. That's the hog barns. Asthma, this one published 20 years ago. Children going to a school within 5 miles of a CAFO, their risk of asthma is doubled. This is Wisconsin. Nitrate in drinking water in Wisconsin. Every year, 111 to about 300 cases of colorectal, ovarian, thyroid, bladder, and kidney cancer correlate with high nitrate drinking water in that state. And so nationwide, we see this drinking nitrate, high nitrate water. This paper published 5 years ago, 2,300 to about 13,000 nitrate attributable cancer cases annually in the US, of which 54 to 82% are colorectal cancer. And so the consequences of this production system, this farming production system, are real, okay, on human health. We haven't really talked about this in Iowa. All these papers have been published a number of years ago. Our political leaders don't talk about it. And so it gets sort of shoved into the filing cabinet. But then we see this story came out a few months ago that Iowa has the second highest cancer rate of any state in the United States. And we're the only state where the incidence of cancer is increasing. And so, you know, can we just definitively say this is because of agriculture? Well, no, but certainly these associations seem obvious. And so this whole thing with agriculture and this production system has really been ingrained into our institutions. And where I worked at the University of Iowa, we had our own drinking water treatment plant. There was a drinking water treatment plant there to train engineers as they get their degrees, and that water was provided to cancer. Well, the Iowa River has high nitrate, and so a few years ago, the university had to put in reverse osmosis to remove nitrate from the drinking water so safe water could be supplied to campus. But if you ever watch the University of Iowa football games on TV, what do? At the end of the first quarter, the whole stadium stands up and they wave to the kids in the children's hospital just across from the stadium. And do we ever think why some of those kids might be in the hospital, right? And again, the university here in Iowa City and Iowa State University, they're very much supportive of these agricultural production systems. We have our football coach, Kirk Ferentz, who records radio commercials for the industry, and the university is really invested in this America Needs Farmers football game. And so, at the same time, we're putting nitrate removal on the drinking water treatment plant. Here's the drinking fountains at Kinnick Stadium in Iowa City, where the university plays football. We have the Iowa corn growers sponsoring the drinking fountains at the football stadium. And so this is an example of how the industry has really infiltrated our institutions and gotten them to deliver messages to the public that are favorable to the industry. So it's not just drinking water. We know that this nutrient pollution from the nitrate and the phosphorus causes a dead zone down at the Gulf of Mexico at the outlet of the Mississippi River. All our rivers in Iowa ultimately drain to the Mississippi, and so these nutrients get down there, cause these big algae blooms. When the algae die, it consumes the oxygen in the water column and leave the conditions unsuitable for species like shrimp and fish. We have the same thing at Lake Erie. Agriculture in eastern Indiana and western Ohio and southeastern Michigan cause the same phenomenon. And so when I talk to people about this, specific to Iowa, I say we are polluting at a continental scale. And so when we look at Iowa relative to the entire Mississippi River Basin, about 31% of our land drains to the Missouri River, about 69% drains to the upper Mississippi River. The Missouri River Basin is huge. It goes clear to the Continental Divide in Montana, and Iowa has 3.3% of the land in the Missouri Basin, but we contribute 55% of the nitrate to the Missouri River. Likewise, the upper Mississippi, we have 21% of the land. We contribute 45% of the nitrate. And down at the Gulf of Mexico, we have 4.5% of the land. We contribute 29% of the nitrate and 15% of the phosphorus. And so again, we are polluting at the continental scale. What we do here, affects an ocean 2,000 miles away. A few years ago, Iowa DNR funded me to create a water quality index. And I don't want to get too much into the details here, but this gives a single number index on how to rate the quality of Iowa streams. The index is based on nitrogen, phosphorus, E. coli, turbidity, and dissolved oxygen monitoring data. Our best stream is up there in northeast Iowa, Bloody Run Creek. We see the upper Wapsie there, 53.7, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Our worst stream is in western Iowa, the Boyer River, and these streams flowing to the Missouri River tend to be our worst. And so in terms of the upper Wapsie, that's that 53.7. Oh, sorry. Since 1999, out of those 44 sites, less than 5%, so 3 out of 44 are improving. Only 5% of them, or only 3 out of 44 improved greater than 5%. 16 out of 44, no change, less than 5% change. 25 out of 44 declining. And so the upper Wapsie is a high nitrate stream. This is probably our best warm water stream, but it has high nutrient concentrations. But it's still got a real viable fishery. The water's not too muddy. It's still got some ecological integrity. And why is that? It's because the riparian area is intact. And so when we look at the stream banks there, they still look pretty good. We're not cropping right up to the edge of the stream. And so consequently, we still have desirable species, again, like the smallmouth bass there on the left, and then northern pike. And so if we could just stop farming up to the edge of our streams could probably tolerate some of this nitrate pollution and some of this other nutrient pollution. But we can't even get farmers to do that. So we're trying to solve this problem of nitrate pollution in our state with what we call the Iowa Nutrient Reduction Strategy. And what that does is it has a list of practices that farmers can adopt that are eligible for cost share. And so that means the public will help pay for them. And the farmers can put these on their land and the public will pay for them. And so when we look at this, the cost for a farmer to buy the nitrogen fertilizer is about 50 cents per pound right now. The cost for these best management practices to keep the nitrate out of the streams is about $2 to $10 per pound, depending on what the practice is. So let's say an average of $6. So 50 cents to buy it and $6 to keep it out of the stream. How is this going to work? This just is not going to pencil out. And so our average statewide nitrate load in our streams is 600 million pounds. The nutrient strategy has an objective of 45% reduction. That would be 270 million pounds per year. And so at $2 to $10 a pound to keep it out of the stream, that's 540 million to $2.7 billion per year. We are never going to have the money to solve this problem in the Corn Belt doing it farmer by farmer, field by field with these BMPs. It's just never going to work. There's 3 million people in Iowa, and so $2.7 billion per year, that's almost $1,000 per person per year. You know, nobody wants to get out their checkbook and write a check for $1,000 to make this better. So what can we do? Well, this is Matt Liebman. He is retired from Iowa State. He was a professor in the College of Agriculture, and he spent his career studying these diverse rotations. And so he looked at a 5-year rotation of corn, soybean, oats, and then 2 years of alfalfa versus a corn soybean rotation, a 2-year rotation. And when we look at that, a nitrogen fertilizer use in the 5-year rotation, 91% lower, herbicide use 97% lower. Even with much lower use of herbicide, the weed biomass is similar. Soybean health was better. Soil health was better. The nitrate in the drainage tiles, draining the fields, 57% lower in the 5-year rotation. So remember, the nutrient strategy has an objective of 45% reduction. Here we get 57% reduction, and this costs the taxpayer nothing, $0, no cost share dollars. We cut soil erosion in half. We cut fossil fuel use 60%. The net returns for the farmer were similar, so their revenue was lower in the 5-year rotation, but their input costs were also lower. And so why don't we do this? And, you know, the answer is we have all this built infrastructure to support the corn soy system. And when we diversify these farms, it means more work. And so when you have more diversity on a farm, that means more work for the farmers. They don't want to do this. The other thing I talk a lot about these days is ethanol. And so 60% of our corn in Iowa goes to produce ethanol for motor fuel. And so this is very much linked to the demographics of farming in Iowa. We look at the price of an acre of Iowa farmland, they're in brown, versus the amount of fuel ethanol this country has produced, and they increase in lockstep, right? And so we've created this extremely expensive farmland because we have a guaranteed market for corn through the Renewable Fuel Standard. That's the Energy Policy Act of 2005. And so think about this. The calories from corn used to produce fuel ethanol exceed the caloric requirements of every person in the country. And so we're putting more calories from corn into fuel ethanol than what we're putting into our bodies as a whole. Why are we doing this? And so ethanol also creates this perversity in U.S. agriculture. When I was growing up, western Nebraska, western Kansas, that was wheat country. Now we grow corn out there. And it's too dry to grow corn, and so we have to irrigate it. And we're irrigating it with the Ogallala Aquifer. We're sucking it dry to irrigate corn to produce ethanol. It takes 6,000 years to naturally replenish the Ogallala Aquifer. Why are we doing this? Why are we growing corn out there in a semi-desert? We've all heard about the Colorado River going dry. Los Angeles, Phoenix, Las Vegas are going to run out of water, we hear. Well, half of the Colorado River goes to irrigate alfalfa. Well, you know, this is a crop we could grow in Iowa and the rest of the Corn Belt without irrigation. But why are we doing this? Well, it's because we're growing corn here in the Corn Belt for ethanol. And so as a consequence, we're growing alfalfa in a desert, and we export a lot of this to China and Saudi Arabia. And so, you know, this is just perverse. You know, this is not a sustainable agricultural approach. When we look at ethanol, what are the environmental outcomes? Well, there are really no benefits to using ethanol. We get the water pollution from the corn production, and then the industry would like us to believe that ethanol reduces greenhouse gas emissions, but this paper from the University of Wisconsin a couple years ago shows that fuel ethanol actually increases greenhouse gas emissions 24% versus unblended gasoline. And so why are we doing this? Clearly, we're just doing it for commerce. Excuse me.
So, Chris,
Yes.
how much more do you want to show here?
Okay, so let's just end with this slide.
Oh, and with this slide. Okay.
What else could we do on this land where we're growing all this ethanol? And so we have 7 million acres in Iowa that are used to grow corn for ethanol. Well, we could take 1.1 million acres. We could grow enough dried beans for every person in the United States. We could take 360,000 of those acres. We could grow all the potatoes for every person in the country. We could grow all the apples, all the sweet corn, all the onions, all the cherries, and all the walnuts, and still have 5 million acres left. And so why are we doing this? We really need to design a production system where it's designed around human nutrition and environmental outcomes. What we have is a production system designed around commerce, okay? And so I like to say all the time, you know, with agriculture, look, when what you do affects everybody, everybody should have a say in what you do. And I think we really need to rethink our agricultural production systems in this country. And again, we need to design systems that are going to benefit human nutrition and human health and optimize environmental outcomes. So I'm happy to take questions now and discuss what you'd like to discuss.
Well, thank you, Chris. This is so illuminating, and I wonder if how do people in Iowa begin to understand what you've presented to us and to begin to change the system, so to speak, to advocate and take actions that will help, not only that will help in education, but also with change?
So I get this question all the time. What
I'm
can
sure
I
you
do?
do. That's
What
right.
can I do? And,
Right.
you know, look, our legislature right now is a non-starter here, and we've had both political parties very much on board with this. And so when Iowa's had the first presidential caucus, right? And so when the presidential candidates come here, they're really forced to kneel at this altar of ethanol, right? We force them to do that. And so as a consequence, both parties have been supportive of this existing system. And so as a result, people can't go into the voting booth and check, what they perceive to be the correct box and expect change. And so people need to agitate for better water and better environmental conditions here. How can you agitate? Well, you've got to organize, right? And so these are big, colossal problems, huge continental scale problems, as I said. And so it has to change. You have to demand change at the grassroots. You have to organize and agitate for what you want.
So with COP29 coming up in the late fall, is this an opportunity for the activists and for the NGOs to agitate there and to link the production of ethanol to climate warming, global warming, and climate catastrophes?
So I think the NGOs have been not very aggressive in their opposition to ethanol.
Yeah.
And so, this is really, the ethanol industry is really entrenched, and it's the ethanol industry and the oil industry have just almost become one and the same now. And so I would like to see the NGOs take more aggressive stances on these things. But again, I think the NGOs, a lot of them have boards that they answer to, right? And people that are on the boards tend to be important people. They might own farmland. They might be financially invested in one aspect of agriculture or another. And so I think in many cases, the NGOs have not really agitated very effectively for this, and there's no desire from their staff to do so. And so I
So
think
I see that Mary Beth has her hand up. Mary Beth?
Hi, Chris. Could you explain the role of the Iowa Farm Bureau in oh, they want me to start my video. I turned it off because of my unstable internet, but okay. Could you explain the role of the Iowa Farm Bureau in spreading misinformation and keeping this documented data from not only from the public, but also from some of the farmers?
so. Of course, Farm Bureau is an advocacy organization, and there's sort of two arms to Farm Bureau. They have the federation, and then they have the financial part, and so they're basically an insurance company. But then the federation lobbies our politicians at both the state and federal level to create policy that's favorable for the financial arm. And so I think Farm Bureau is very much aligned with the existing production systems. And so their financial products oftentimes are associated with a big agribusiness, right? And so big agribusiness wants to maintain the existing system, because to change to a different system, that means recapitalization, right? And so when we look at the countryside here, well, it's not just what the farmer's doing. We look at what all is aligned with corn and soybean. It's the seed companies. This seed is very expensive, billions of dollars. The fertilizer companies. So Koch Industries is one of our biggest fertilizer manufacturers. Everybody's heard of them. We have 1,000 ag retailers across Iowa. We have the trucking industry. We have the rail industry. We have the building trades that work on these confinement buildings. We have the lock and dam system on the Mississippi River. And so the barging companies. And so these are all institutions that Farm Bureau and others are invested in. And so, to talk about the environmental consequences of all this is to put all this in some peril, right? And so there's a real effort to not talk about the water quality data and also the health effects.
So I think, let me have some advice from Dace maybe. Should we close our discussion here and have our next speakers arrived?
Right, so as Congress Coordinator, V. Murphy, I would suggest that we wrap up. We have a program beginning in 3 minutes. We see 3 hands. If everyone can ask the question quickly, that has their hands raised, I'm sure Chris will have the answer they need. Thank you.
Mary, quickly. Mary Sanderson, quickly. Mary?
You're muted, Mary.
Go ahead. Never mind. Never mind. Go away. No more.
Okay. Ginger, very quickly. Judy? Are you muted, Judy? Judy, you're muted.
I'm trying to unmute. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
What about the healthcare industry, hospitals, research agencies? That's could be a source of strength and action.
So it could be, and we look here at the University of Iowa, we have the College of Public Health here, right? But look around the country at what happened to these public health institutions during COVID. A lot of them were muzzled, right? And so COVID was a real eye opener for people that, you know, these public health institutions are not going to be there to help to save us on this stuff. Right? If we think they're going to come to the rescue here, we're wrong, because we saw in COVID, the special interests got in front of that. And so I think it would be nice to think that our healthcare people would advocate for these sorts of things, but you know, they're scared of consequences too.
Yeah. Well, Chris, thank you so very much for joining us. This was a fascinating presentation. And we thank Mary Beth for introducing us to you, of course. And
so again, please accept my apologies on the time. I'm so sorry. If I might suggest, if people put stuff in the chat and you email me the questions, I will reply to the email with answers if you want to do that.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay.
We'll see you again, I expect, for a follow-up.
Okay. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Goodbye. So at 7:30, everybody, we have Mary Grant of Food and Water Watch speaking, and Marcela Olivera. And I think that you'll find their presentation on water, the privatization of water, and local to global solutions, just what we need to focus on.
I can begin first. So good evening, everyone, and thank you to Nancy for inviting me to speak with you all today. I'm going to share my screen, have a couple slides. So I'm Mary Grant, the Public Water for All campaign director at Food and Water Watch. Food and Water Watch is a U.S. environmental organization. We mobilize people to build power to move bold and uncompromised solutions to the most pressing food, water, and climate problems of our time. I work with our organizers on campaigns to support safe, affordable, publicly controlled water across the country. So today I'm going to talk about corporate violence through privatization with a focus on water access in the United States. I'll start with an overview of water privatization. I'll talk about how it harms people, and I'll discuss some emerging corporate strategies to watch out for. At the end, I'll highlight some solutions. Marcela and I will take questions after she presents, so please save them for then. So first, let's talk about water privatization. Let's level set with a definition. Water privatization can be used broadly to talk about the various ways that corporations control water resources. Bottled water, water rights markets. I know you have some sessions tomorrow on both those topics. But for the purposes of our conversation this evening, when I say water privatization, I mean the transfer of control of water and sewer systems, the utility systems, to for-profit corporations. Sometimes when I talk about water privatization, people are shocked. They're unaware that private utilities, water utilities, even exist. That's because most people in the United States receive their water service from a publicly owned system, usually their local government. Nearly 90% of people on a water system get their water service from a publicly owned system, and more than 95% of people get their wastewater treatment from a publicly owned treatment system. There are a lot of reasons why public water prevails nationally, from control of decision-making and investments to lower costs and better regional coordination. But historically, many of our nation's water systems, from New York City to San Francisco, were actually privately controlled, and it was a disaster. For example, this is one of my favorite examples. It's the most compelling. In New York City, the predecessor of the bank, JP Morgan Chase, used to control the water supply. The city took it over in the 1800s because a cholera epidemic killed 3,500 people, and huge fires roiled the city, causing massive property destruction. The company was blamed because it refused to extend water service to low-income areas, tenements in the city where it didn't think it could make money. In the 1800s through the early 1900s, thousands of US cities took control of their water systems from for-profit companies to improve water quality, lower costs, and provide more equitable service. Overall, public water led to better access and improved water quality, helping to prevent the spread of diseases. Local governments extended water lines to low-income areas and Black communities in particular that had been historically excluded by private water companies. One analysis found that public ownership of water systems cut typhoid rates in Black communities in the South by as much as 42%. So today, what we're seeing is that public water is facing new threats. Large corporations are targeting many water and sewer systems for takeover. The drivers of water privatization are twofold. On one hand, we have this historic federal disinvestment in water, and on the other, we have the skyrocketing costs of providing safe water. Decades of federal austerity are colliding with the growing costs due to corporate and military pollution and the fossil fuel-driven climate crisis. Overall, federal funding for water and wastewater infrastructure has plummeted since its peak in the 1970s. After Ronald Reagan phased out the construction grant program, federal support dropped 77% from its peak. Federal funding peaked in 1977 to 2017 in real terms. That's a per capita decrease of 84% over those 40 years. The 2021 bipartisan infrastructure law was a step in the right direction and a down payment on what we need, but it was still met only 7% of the water needs identified by the US EPA at that time. And the needs are skyrocketing. Earlier this year, EPA released an updated estimate and found that now our water and sewer systems need more than $1.3 trillion. That's trillion with a T, just to comply with existing federal law. Our public water systems have been starved of the resources they need. They have been poisoned by corporate and military polluters, and now corporate vultures are circling them for takeover. There are regional differences in private control of water systems. What we're seeing is that privatizers are most aggressive in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Missouri, Illinois, and Indiana. There's actually very little private ownership in the South and then the Plains, and then some of the Great Lakes states like Michigan. Some states, though, have a lot of privately owned water systems. New Jersey, for example, has 40% of people get their water from a corporate provider. So what's at risk when you privatize your water system? What is the danger or the harm of corporate control of water? This isn't just an ideological debate. There are material impacts and consequences of privatization. The heart of the issue is about who controls the system, who makes the big decisions about where to extend lines, how do we charge for service, and so much more. It's about accountability and transparency in those decisions. With public control, you have access to meetings where decisions are made and direct communication with the decision makers. You can email the mayor or the city council, but with private control, you're cut out of that process. You don't have access to the corporate boardroom, which is exempt from state transparency laws. You can't FOIA the CEO of Veolia. You can't FOIA the CEO of American Water. Water prices are approved not by the city council, but usually by appointed officials at the public utility commissions. And the process is really difficult for regular folk to get involved in. Often you need a lawyer to actually intervene. And in terms of water prices, we found, like almost every other academic study I've seen, that private water is so much more expensive than local government service. We compiled the rates for the 500 largest community water systems and found that on average, among these large systems, private water charges 59% more than local governments charge for the same amount of water. Researchers from Cornell not only found that privately owned systems charge statistically higher rates, but they also found that private ownership was the single biggest factor driving higher rates, even more than aging infrastructure, even more than drought. And the key reason is corporate profit. Big water companies earn a rate of return on their investment of 10 to 11%. State regulators allow them to add that markup onto the cost of every single improvement project and every single new system they buy. They pass it all on, plus taxes, income, and property, onto customers through higher rates. And what does that mean for households? It means higher and higher water bills. More than 90% of water projects are financed by local governments and repaid through water bills. Already under public control, water rates are increasing nationally by about 5% a year, but the median household income is increasing about half that rate. This is creating this water affordability gap. Localities right now are grappling with water service costs that are increasingly unaffordable for more and more of their residents. As many as more than 1/3 of the country could already have been experiencing unaffordable water bills as of 5 years ago. Privatization deepens our nation's water affordability crisis. It jeopardizes access to safe water. And that's because when a household receives a water bill they can't afford, they have to make tough choices. Sometimes they may cut back on medicine or groceries or other essentials, or they do not pay for their water service. It's a simple reality that unaffordable bills are often unpaid bills. The main collection practice used by utilities, especially private utilities, for unpaid water bills is service shutoffs. We conducted the first nationwide water shutoff survey in 2016. That year, an estimated 15 million people in the United States experienced a water shutoff for non-payment of water bills. Water shutoffs pose a real threat to human health. Without water, you can't flush your toilet, you can't wash your hands, and it can cause diseases to spread and allow people to become sick. Water shutoffs can make homes uninhabitable, forcing families to move. This can negatively impact children's education. Water shutoffs can tear families apart. Lack of water access in the home is considered child neglect in 21 states. And water shutoffs had led to children being taken from their homes under child protection laws in places like Detroit. While both public and private water systems use this violent, and it is a violent collection practice, with public control, you can get involved and pass the laws that are necessary to stop it. It matters who controls your water system so that you can organize, agitate, and advocate for water affordability, bans on water service shutoffs, and for policies that put people before profits. So now I'm going to talk about the threats we're seeing from these private water companies, their main strategies that they're using to privatize water systems. So basically, this is what you should be on the lookout for in your state and in your community. The big water corporate players are very aggressive right now. They're targeting cash-strapped communities, often offering large sums of money to entice the city to privatize. But all that money will be recovered through rates hikes and customers' bills. So they're also targeting systems that are under emergency management or state or federal oversight, which can force systems into privatization. That happened recently in Jackson, Mississippi last year. An EPA imposed a manager of their water system, and it privatized the operations to the private company Jacobs. Investor-owned utilities are particularly targeting sewer systems in their water system service area. So we're seeing a lot of sewer system sales in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. These companies also seek what they call tuck-in acquisitions. Well, they'll buy up water and sewer systems in wealthier suburbs right next to their existing network. And these companies are focused in the states where they have successfully passed corporate-friendly laws and regulations. So on that note, this is maybe the biggest factor that is driving water privatization. The big water companies have been very successful lobbying for changes that make it easier and more profitable to privatize systems and then hike rates after privatization. They are focused mostly at the state level, but they do have a couple federal priorities. So on the screen are a couple of these laws. They often have these titles or these names with flowery, rosy language that really obscures what the legislation does. At the federal level, their big piece of legislation is called the Clean Water SRF Parity Act. From Rep. Garamendi from California, it would open up federal wastewater funding to investor-owned utilities. Historically, since the beginning of the federal wastewater construction grant program in the mid-1900s, these funds have all been dedicated to publicly owned treatment works. This legislation would open it up to companies across the country. They would take limited dollars away from our local government providers. In particular, those bipartisan infrastructure law dollars would be up for grabs. At the state level, they are pursuing 4 main legislative priorities. Fair market value legislation. This inflates the value of a system, allowing companies to offer even higher purchase prices to entice cities to sell and leading to higher profits for the company, all on the backs of ratepayers who see even larger and larger water bills. They're looking for the Water Quality Accountability Act. Again, this sounds like a good thing. It's passed in New Jersey first. It imposes onerous and unnecessary paperwork burden in order to strong-arm small systems into privatization without actually requiring improvements in water quality. They are also seeking to consolidate drinking water and wastewater services so that they can charge their drinking water customers the costs of buying up all these sewer systems they're targeting. And lastly, they want to remove referendum requirements. They want to cut the public out of decision-making and strip away democracy from these big decisions. That's what you should look for at the state level, but what should you look out for in your local community? These companies often track infrastructure issues and make pitches based on local news stories. Some of them, like American Water, are speculating that the new PFAS regulations, that the new enforceable limits on these toxic forever chemicals in particular, will drive more communities to privatize. However, privatization, again, is the most expensive way to make an improvement project, not only because private financing is expensive, but also because you have to repay the purchase price that the company gives the city for the system. And all of that comes with a 10% markup after taxes for corporate profits. The companies also target cities with well-run water systems if the city itself has budget concerns. We're seeing this in Chester, Pennsylvania right now. So many communities that we see privatized don't do so because the water system has issues, but because a mayor wants to avoid raising taxes or wants to fund a pet redevelopment project with that one-time infusion of cash from the sale of the utility. And this is what we call taxing through the tap. It's a non-transparent and fiscally irresponsible way to raise money for general city services. And another thing just to watch out for is the mayor's politics, including that anti-tax or pro-developer position, as well as the mayor's activities. These big companies can fund conferences like the Mayor's Water Council to push privatization. They wine and they dine the elected officials. But what are the solutions? These are large corporations. What can we do to resist them? First, you have to know that you and your neighbors have the power to stop water privatization. Despite the millions of dollars that these companies have spent lobbying for pro-privatization legislation and trying to sway public officials, hundreds of communities have won and defeated privatization efforts. They've used a variety of strategies to help guard against water privatization, including strengthening local laws to require a public vote or outright banning water privatization. One example is the city of Baltimore in Maryland, which has been working to address its own water affordability and water quality issues. In the midst of a water affordability crisis, before a new water affordability program launched, in the fall of 2017, Suez, which is now owned by the company Veolia, and the Wall Street firm KKR targeted Baltimore for a long-term lease concession of its water and sewer systems. Privatization would have deepened Baltimore's affordability crisis, and KKR and Suez were clear when they approached Baltimore officials that rates would go up, and they would go up proportionately to the amount of money that the city wanted in exchange for the deal. So the community came together and banned water privatization. In 2018, the then mayor drafted a charter amendment to declare the water system to be an inalienable asset of the city. The city council unanimously approved it and sent it to voters. That November in 2018, 77% of voters approved ballot question E to make Baltimore the first major US city to ban water privatization. So just to be clear, this is not a vote that the water system was perfect, of course. It was a commitment to work together to find public solutions. Another example is Atlantic City. In 2017, by a nearly unanimous vote, 8-0 with one abstention, the City Council of Atlantic City passed an ordinance demanding a public vote on any sale of their municipal water authority. It was a direct challenge to the state takeover of Atlantic City, engineered by then Governor Chris Christie. The takeover gave the state broad powers, including the ability to sell off the well-run water system to private corporations with deep political connections to leaders in both political parties. AC Citizens Against the State Takeover came together to ensure that any sale of their water system was put to a public vote. The campaign went door to door, neighbor to neighbor, to collect petitions necessary to make sure that Atlantic City residents were given a voice in controlling the resources that belonged to them. And even then, Chris Christie backed off after that display of power. Overall, we know that our water and sewer systems are old and need major updates. We see it every day when water main breaks, flood roads and homes, as sewage spills contaminate our waterways and back up into our homes. The real solution is to stop austerity and to commit to public funding. That's why we support the Water Act, the Water Affordability, Transparency, Equity, and Reliability Act in Congress. It would create a trust fund to provide dedicated federal funding at a level that is necessary based on the latest EPA needs surveys. It would provide billions in funding each and every year to public drinking water systems, wastewater systems, household wells, septics, and school water infrastructure. It is funded by just a small, tiny rollback of the Trump administration's corporate income tax cuts. A 3.5 percentage point increase in corporate income taxes could meet the needs of our water systems. This is just a small rollback of those previous tax cuts. And it really centers the question of the priorities of the United States. Importantly, the Water Act will also counter corporate control of water, not only by providing resources so communities can improve their water systems on their own, but also by removing corporate subsidies and supporting community-led efforts to exit privatization deals and buy their water systems back from corporations. Fundamentally, we need to change how we fund our water so that we center safe, affordable, and publicly controlled water for everyone. So I want to thank you all for your time. We'll take questions again at the end, but now I'll just turn it over to Marcela to talk about the global water justice movement. And while we switch over, I'm going to also put a couple links in the chat so that you can take action right now to support the Water Act and to oppose private subsidies to private companies.
Thank you, Mary. I guess I can go ahead. Okay, so we have been, I have been present in the last, also when Chris was giving a talk, and that was pretty scary of, what's going on there. I'm gonna try to focus on also the things that we are doing in order to fight what's happening in the world. I'm gonna share my screen.
Marcela, maybe you could speak up a little louder.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Try. Okay, thank you, Nancy. So I'm going to talk about something that is called Blue Communities. But first, I'd like to start saying that, a personal story about how I got involved on the water movement. I don't know how many of you have heard about Cochabamba, but I am based in Cochabamba, and 24 years ago, a private company from California, from San Francisco, called Bechtel, came to my country and tried to privatize the water system from the city where I live. This privatization, as Mary explained, didn't come just with selling our water system, but also with changes in legislation, with a bunch of other things that were commodifying our water in general. And I'm talking about Bolivia as a country. So it did affect the whole country. We fought, we contested this, and after many months in the streets, we could win this battle against privatization, and we kicked out this horrible corporation from our country. What happened after that is it's a long story, and it's a story that's not very well, not very well known. But that's another talk. What I want to also say is that after this battle that was won, this news went around the world and were also an inspiration for other movements and other countries that were fighting privatization. So I wanna go over some of these important parts of what has been going on around the world related to water and how we are fighting the things that are happening also in our countries. So after Cochabamba in 2003, we, the international water movement, I will call it like that, many countries that were in that time experiencing water privatization start to get together. On one of these places where we got together was something that was called the World Water Forum, which is a corporation-driven event that it happens every 3 years in the world. The last one was a few days ago in Bali, Indonesia. So in these places, the communities, the cities, the organizations that were fighting water privatization start to get together. And on that year also, an Inter-American Water Justice Network to fight water privatization in the Americas also was born. In 2004, inspired by what was going also in the rest of the world, the Uruguayan people, the citizens in Uruguay, start to push for a referendum and to make changes in the legislation. And we can say that this in 2004, the legislation changed and it was declared, the water was declared a human right in Uruguay, which started for us, you know, it was the first battle that was won in the ballots. It was won on the legislation part. It was not won on the streets like what happened with us in 2000. After that, in 2009, something that we call the Platform for Community Partnerships of the Americas also was born. This idea of this platform came under the, you know, when the World Bank was proposing, when the World Bank started to see that privatization was not working as they thought it was going to be working, they start to talk about these public-private partnerships, that it's a new way of privatization. In 2009, we said we have an alternative to that, and it's the community and public partnerships. So we are promoting these partnerships in our region since 2009. I'll go to that a little bit later. In 2022, we have started what, you know, this international water movement came under the name of the People's Water Forum in order to contrast, in order to challenge the corporate World Water Forum. And also in 2022, the Africa Water Justice Network was also born. On all of that, I'll say that we, you know, organized a bunch of alternative World Water Forums again to fight the corporate water forum. There was a remunicipalization movement mainly in Europe and also in United States. I guess Mary can tell us more. But until you know, the past year, we have like 339 water utilities that went back into public hands with a lot of problems. But you know, anyway, that's also a proof that privatization doesn't work. So talking about the Platform for Community Partnerships of the Americas, again, you know, this is something that we try to do to show that we are not just opposing to water privatization, that we are not just resisting water privatization, that we are not just fighting these policies, but also that we are, you know, proposing some solutions to the crisis related to water, that we are capable to also design our own ways of doing things, our own policies, our own systems, that it's not like they tell us, you know, that especially these policies that come from the World Bank and the IMF and also the regional development banks in our countries, that they tell, you know, they come to our countries with a recipe of how we have to manage our water systems and our water sources. So in this platform that we created in the Americas, we said we are also capable to create our own solutions. So these are some of the organizations that are part of this platform. On all these years, we have created approximately 20 agreements between water systems in our region. And when I'm talking about water systems, I'm talking about public and state-run water systems, but also community water systems or cooperatives, water cooperatives that are these, you know, like This is a reality that's not very well known in the North, but around 70 million people in the Americas, in Latin America, get their water from these community-run water systems. Just to give you an example, in the city where I live, 60% of the population get the water from these small water systems. We don't have much data on these autonomous water systems or community water systems, but they are huge, and we have found them also in Africa. We know that there are some in United States. Anyway, this is a reality that's not very well known. But anyway, we have been creating these exchanges among these water systems, and we have created a new way of cooperation that is not based in profit, but it's based in solidarity, and also under the idea that we all have knowledge and that we all can share something to at organizational level, but also at the technical level. So at the platform, and on this platform, we decided also a few years ago to go with something that is called Blue Communities. Blue communities in the North have a different narrative. They have like three main pledges that I'll say. One of them is, declare that water should be run in public hands, ban the use of plastic and the use of bottled water in the cities, in events run by the city. Anyway, in Latin America, we have created our own narrative because our reality is very different from what's happening in the North. And these are some of the pledges or principles that we have found that can run on what we, under the umbrella of the Blue Communities. And it's again recognize the recognition of water as a common good, but also a human right. It is important to understand that the right to water has different dimensions. Then recognize the value of these communities running their own water systems. Rejection of all forms of privatization and commodification of water. There are new waves of privatization coming to our countries, and there are different. They are so smart that they have created things that are, hidden, but that are still forms of privatization. Then we are focusing obviously on cooperation and agreements between community water systems. Many of these water systems also are, situated in the peri-urban areas of the cities, but also in the countryside. So we are talking about also that these organizations or these communities are taking care also of the environment and the quality of water. We are talking about management of these water systems that should be transparent. And we are also talking about sewage, and that we have to return the water the way that we got it. So these are some of the principles that we're trying to apply on the Blue Communities. So some of the Blue Communities that we already have in Latin America, two of them are in Colombia. We have created with them, there's the explanation there, and you can, somebody said that these presentations will be shared with you later, but I will mainly recommend to see, or to, if you want to see what communities are doing in Latin America, to see this community, which is in the city, in the municipality of Tasco in Colombia. They have fought mining companies in their territory. They could, for the first time in the story of in the history of Colombia, they could impeach a mayor that was in favor of these mining companies that were also Canadian. And they have, you know, won important battles keeping water safe for the people. Another blue community is one that we discovered in Chile. This community, it's a union, or it's an association of small water systems in a very, very dry area in Chile, that it's under the, you know, these big avocado companies are draining all the water from the area, and are taking all the, you know, they have destroyed already a river from there. Anyway, these organizations, these water systems from this area have created this union and are trying to provide water to the people, are creating solutions based on, you know, on solidarity among them. During the pandemic, they did amazing things, helping each other with things that go beyond water. And I think this is an important thing to mention, because in Latin America, water crosses many other issues. It's not just, you know, the water that comes from our faucets. You know, it has to do with you know, our environment. It has to do with the rivers from where the water is coming from. It has to do also with, you know, democracy, like who takes the decisions on these small community water systems. And sometimes it also has to do with, you know, the security in a neighborhood or a place that from where the water is being provided. I myself are part of a community water system. 5,000 families get the water from this system, and you know, when we get together, because we get together periodically to talk about the problems that we have and the, you know, issues that are in our water system, we also talk about other problems in our neighbors. We talk about the security, we talk about garbage, we talk about, you know, if some of our, you know, if there is a family that needs help, we, you know, try to help this family. So it goes beyond water. And I think this is important to, you know, when we are talking about water is life, we are also talking about those issues, all the things that cross our lives. So it's to me, it's very important that we, you know, this almost a slogan that we use so much, water is life, that we can see it in all the possible dimensions that it has. So when we're talking about democratization of our, you know, our water systems at the public level, for example, what we are asking more participation of us as organized communities. And that's something that I feel it's missing in these big water public companies. I'm gonna finish there. Yeah, I'm gonna finish there and see if perhaps there are questions for Mary and I. But anyway, I just wanted to repeat again once more that we're not just here to oppose things or to resist privatization, but I think we are mainly creating solutions. We are capable to do that, and we don't have to feel discouraged or feel like that's not possible, because we are very creative.
Well, thank you both, Mary and Marcela, very much. I think this is the kind of sort of overview, but also a kind of update on where we stand in this situation of water privatization and community water. So let's go to questions. Let's
Randy
see.
Hicks is on the stack.
Yes. Randy Hicks,
So I have a
please.
question. I have a question.
I saw one of your presentations on democracy now. One of the things you guys talked about was the Food and Water Watch folks and your organization here. How do you get the government to get along with what you're trying to do here if the government is of one persuasion or another? And also when it comes to drought policy, I understand that under drought policy, governments usually take over the control of the water in their nations. And so I just want to know if you two could answer those two questions.
We can start with the first one. So our theory of change is about bringing people together to hold elected officials accountable. So we're a C3, we're a C4, so that means we do community organizing as well as political work, right? So this is our theory of change. We need to hold these elected officials accountable. This is why we have a democratic system. And we believe in the power of people, regular folk coming together to counter those corporate influences that mean that the governments aren't doing the things that they need to do to protect their people and their constituents. I mean, sometimes it can be really hard, right? And I think we have to acknowledge that different contexts, it can be very difficult to mobilize people, to bring people together and to hold elected officials accountable. We can make change. Sometimes we narrow that change that we seek based on those political realities. But we really need to push for the biggest and the boldest and the most uncompromised solutions. And I think it's just the beginning, right? Like it's a mobilization, it's a movement. So as we win small victories along the way, like we stop one privatization fight, we can bridge partisan lines to fight privatization. This is an issue that is felt by everyone. It's a pocketbook issue. It hits some people harder than others, but it's felt across the political spectrum. So we've built alliances and communities, left-right alliances and communities that have held elected officials accountable and pushed them to stop privatization deals. So we build these small movements, these small victories, and as we build power for the larger changes that need to happen. I think the folks in Michigan who are fighting for water affordability for decades kind of point those pictures. They were able to get Detroit to stop shutoffs, but they're still pushing for water affordability. Their state legislature switched hands after a long time. And so they're able now to make some strides. There's legislation they're working on, and there's real momentum happening. So, but it can take decades, and it can be frustrating for a lot of people how long it can take to make those political changes. But I think part of that process of building a movement is about building in your victories, stopping these smaller deals along the way so that you can keep people energized and engaged in the process. So I think that stopping privatization is winnable. Hundreds of communities have done it across the country. It's winnable in the Deep South. It's winnable in the Northeast, on the West Coast. It's something that we can really achieve real victories at. And for the drought question, you asked about governments. For the US, we know that that's not true, right? Water rights out west are private property, right? And the federal government is very reluctant to intervene in private property transactions and regulating private property in different states. They could buy back water rights, and they're trying to do that along the Colorado River, but it's about buying it back. It's not about seizing it or appropriating it for the public benefit. There's a lot of money from the IRA that's going to buying back water rights. But again, it's only small pieces, and the Colorado River Accord is not tackling the biggest abusers of our water, agriculture. Mostly, they're not looking at stopping these big abuses by agriculture. So they're not looking at or trying to tackle how big factory farms abuse our water out west. So I'll pass it to Marcela to talk about how other countries handle droughts.
We actually had a webinar a few weeks ago on drought. We have experiencing serious drought in Uruguay, for example, like a year ago. And we think, yes, climate change is happening, but also there is a bad management of water. The same has happened. It's happening right now, or was happening a few months ago in Spain, for example. And I think, the way that to handle these things are demanding things to our government. And how can we do that? You know, organizing ourselves as communities, because we cannot do that if we are individuals, right? And I think there is an important difference here in between, you know, being an activist and being an organizer, because an organizer does it from scratch, right? We start to, it's about talking with our neighborhoods. It's talking about, you know, in our, I don't know, in our churches, in our small communities, and starting from there. But yes, related to drought, that's what we have found out. It's not just climate change, but how bad water is being managed by our governments, by the state.
Alan?
Yes, I thank you for this discussion. And I work in Ann Arbor on the center of the city being a community commons. The commons is sort of the focal point of our struggle with power. And that is community resources commonly pooled and self-managed by the users. And what I hear in the view of the water is that the water is seen as a community commons to be self-managed by the users. And I think that concept connects also with the struggles for land and many other resources. And that it's a wider struggle than simply the water. It's against the power that would dominate and exploit and extract value from any resource. So I just wanted to put in the sense, consider this more widely. This is a struggle for the commons, and the water is our commons, a commonly pooled resource, self-managed by the users. And that concept won the Nobel Prize in Economics by Eleanor Ostrom a few years ago on the governance of the common, that self-management by the user is more efficient, more productive than either management by the government or by some privatized corporation that wants to get its profit out of the deal. So I'm here just to put the pebble of the commons in the conversation. Thank you all very much. Very interesting all.
Thank you. You were more articulated than me putting that together. It's so hard for me because English is not my language. But yes, you know, when I just want to comment briefly on that. When water returned to our hands after it was privatized, and when I say our hands, it's, you know, it was which hands? It came back to the municipality again. And municipalities are run by politicians, and those same politicians were the ones that were selling before our water system. So it went back to their hands. It didn't come back to our hands. So we really have to think in the notion of public. What does mean public exactly? And when in 2000, when we, you know, won the battles on the street, and we fought for water, we didn't want that our water go back to that type of public. We start to talk about the public in the sense that it belongs to the people. So I really think that we have to think in another notion of public, because public means us. It doesn't mean just a few people deciding about our water sources, right? That's what you know, when we're talking about the right to water that was approved at the UN in 2010, you know, and when it talks about it talks about the role of the states, and it says that the states are the ones that have to guarantee the right to water, right? And that's fine, but that's just one dimension of that. Because here in Latin America, and as you are telling us also in you know, where you live, communities are running this, are providing, are meeting that right to water, are providing water to the people. So this, when I'm talking about the multiple dimensions of the right to water, I'm talking about that dimension too. It's not just the states that have to provide water affordable for the people, but also that the communities have the right to provide that water. And I think the notion of the commons, it fits very well into that.
Thank you very much, Marcela. Do I see another hand up? Is Sheila Harper, is your hand up?
Yes.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very, very much. Are your separate organizations working together as a network? Last evening, we spoke with the Native American group, and because of their limitation in rights to speak out on behalf of their state, because they're not recognized by the state, I think it would be maybe something to consider, networking, because of course we're stronger together. So, I mean, we have various, people here now talking about the water. And I think that the combination with WILPF combined with your separate organizations is a lot stronger. So I just wanted to make that comment. And I also wanted to ask the question whether or not you are working with the Native Americans.
I can answer the question, or Marcela and Food and Water Watch working together. Yes, Marcela is helping lead the People's Water Forum. It's a global network fighting water privatization, and Food and Water Watch is a member of that global forum that's fighting privatization nationally. We're not involved as much as I would like us to be. Our focus is mostly on the US, but we definitely support that vision and the global connections.
We were, we are a small organization. Actually, one person is based in Canada, other person is based in Africa, and I am based in Latin America. And then we have a couple of volunteers around there. But yes, we do work with Native Americans. Actually, we organized a visit of the special rapporteur, Pedro Rojo, in Canada recently, and we put together a meeting with Native Americans in Canada, and I think a report on that is coming from the office of the special rapporteur. And of course, we work also with communities, indigenous communities in Latin America a lot, because most of the population here are indigenous communities. And I guess that tradition of managing water also comes from the indigenous ways of organizing, right? Because the state wasn't present here before the colonization. We didn't have a type of the state, but yes, we do work, and we work with Mary too. Yeah.
Marcela, since you're mentioning the People's Water Forum, are you able to share what happened in Bali a week or so ago?
Yes, briefly, we, as I told you before, we try to organize every time that they organize this corporate World Water Forum, we try to organize what we call the alternative World Water Forum. And that has been happening for many, many years. The past year in actually a couple of years ago, in 2022, we decided that we are not the alternative, that we are the People's Water Forum. So we, this year we organized this forum in Bali at the same time than the corporate water forum. It was thought and we work a lot with local communities in Indonesia. We organized a 3-day event that actually didn't quite happen the way that we imagined, because the corporate forum, we believe, boycott our event. They canceled the venue a few days before we arrived there. They canceled the venue 3 times. the venue that we found to host our event. Then they locked down the local people. There were 50 people in a hotel that were locked down by what we think, what they told us, it's a paramilitary group in Indonesia. It's called PGN. They didn't let pass food to our local friends that were there. They didn't pass nobody there. At the second day, we went with the special rapporteur on the right to water, Pedro Arrojo. We tried to get in. They harassed us. They started to film us. They were mainly men. And they pushed the special rapporteur, which, it became international news. And it was horrible because at the end, the last day, it's only when all this thing happened, the last day we had finally people be able to leave the hotel, and we organized some hybrid event on the last day. But again, all those things are, even if it didn't happen the way that we thought, those are good signs that we are doing a really good job. Because otherwise they wouldn't be threatened by us, right? They will just let it pass, and we probably wouldn't have made so much noise, but it made a lot of noise. And that means we're doing well, and we're walking well. And yes, and even if it was sad and it was scary and many times, because we were, the police came into our hotels, the intel was looking for us. Many of our friends were harassed arriving to the airport in Bali. Anyway, all of that was worth it because people got stronger, especially people in Asia, found the things that we're doing meaningful and saying, yes, we're doing something, because otherwise people wouldn't be, they wouldn't be doing that to us. Anyway.
Yes, well, glad you're safe. You were safe, more or less, I guess you could say. Let's see.
We have 4 minutes.
Yes, thank you. I saw a hand up.
Judy Adams had her hand up for quite a while.
Oh, sure, Judy.
Hi, let's see, my voice is up. I just wanted to find out how the community groups that took over financed the costs of management and membership and so forth.
It never is the same. I mean, like every community organized themselves in a different way. So some of them put a lot of labor work into, creating these water systems. And again, it's sometimes they get help from some organization, or they put their own, money into that. They put the manual labor into that. The cost of the finance of that comes just from enough in order to make it work. For example, to pay a couple of people that will do plumbing, to pay a secretary that will, create the receipts for the bill. That's what I mean when I say that things are not managed well. Because if in these small water systems we make things work, and there are problems, there are a lot of technical problems. Don't think that it's all like nice. But if these small water systems can make it work financially enough to cover the functioning of the whole system, why these big companies cannot do the same? That's why we know they are managed. They are not well managed, because the people in these communities, in these autonomous water systems, are working for enough to have enough to make it work, right? Not to make profit or to, we even at the end of the year, and I know we're short of time, but at the end of the year in my neighborhood, we're 5,000 families. we get a basket of goodies at the end of the year. We get cookies, we get rice, we get, we get a bunch of things. And that was created by our, paying ourselves the bill. It was enough to make it, to make work the system, but also enough to make, give a basket of goodies to every family in our own water system. So it works. And again, there are problems, sewage is one of the problems because it's harder to build a sewage system. So we usually depend on the municipality for that. And there are, sometimes the quality of the water is not the most, we still have to boil our water, for example. So there are problems, but financially they work. And I think this is, and there is democracy inside, there is transparency inside, accountability, because nobody is stealing things to anybody, because there is a lot of social control. We get together every month or every couple of months to see what are the problems there. So they work. And anyway, they work. So we can, I can testify that firsthand.
Well, it shows
Wonderful.
that you are organizers, not activists. Yeah. See?
Well, once again, I thank you so much, Mary and Marcela, for joining us and making such really good presentations to inspire us to into action and support for the Water Act, and to talk among ourselves about blue communities. So maybe we can have in the future an update and another presentation. Thank you so much.